This is a podcast from Rover.
Welcome to Parents We've Met, where we chat about the mess and magic of parenting. Today's guest is someone who champions families, who stands in a gap researching and asking questions, trying to create a society that is better for our children. Her name is Dr. Jin Russell. Thanks so much for hanging out with us today.
Kia ora.
I was thinking actually the first time we met, it was a play date at the zoo and I was invited along and I met you and I thought, I want to be friends with Jin. I just thought you were awesome, and now it's been like 5 years later. It's so like sometimes you meet someone and you go, they're cool, and then it's just the years pass. So it's wonderful to get back together now.
So good. What a treat to have you, Jin. Thank you. You're a paediatric doctor, but when people ask you what's in that, how do you explain all the hats that you wear?
Yeah. Well, I introduce myself as a developmental paediatrician. I work at Starship. And people sometimes don't know what that means. What's a developmental paediatrician? Like paediatricians are people who see kids with asthma or strep throat or whatever. But my job is different. I look after children who have developmental and behavioural issues. There are concerns from school or parents or the wider whānau, and I see children in clinic. And one of the really fun parts about my job is actually being able to go out to schools, see children in schools and in the community. And I really appreciate that. So I've been working at Starship for almost 5 years now in that role. And I have probably a couple of hundred children that I look after there.
Now, in the mix of your big week, you also have family and all the joy and complexities that being a parent can bring. Can you tell us a little bit about your wonderful whānau and who's in it?
Sure. So I'm married to Matheson. He's an Australian. I would say that with a little bit of trepidation because I don't want anyone listening to hold that against me. He's a really nice kind of Australian from Sydney, and he moved to Tamakimikoro 15, 16 years ago now to take up a job as a philosopher. So he works at University of Auckland, and we have two boys, Chester, who's just turned 10, and Toby, who's 7. And we stopped at 2. We thought, maybe we should try for 3. We felt fortunate to have 2, but in the end we thought, 2, if we tried to do more, it'd just wreck us. Like, we wouldn't be Matheson and Jin anymore. We'd be unrecognisable versions of ourselves. So we have a pretty full life, I would say. I work two jobs actually. I told you about my Starship role. I also work in a national function in Health New Zealand as a community paediatrician. So that's looking over the health and development of the children as a whole and across the motu. Those 2 roles keep me really busy. But when I get home, I might finish work at 3 and then I have to put on my mum hat and race the kids down to whatever they want to do. So play dates, tutoring for reading. We've got football in there, music, hip hop. It's pretty busy.
All the things.
Yeah. Awesome. And are there support in the wider whānau? Have you got parents or other ones that you can help subcontract to?
You just subcontract. I like that term, subcontract. Well, we're fortunate that we've got 4 wonderful grandparents. My dad actually helps quite a bit. He takes Chester to tennis. We've got my mum and dad available for babysitting. They live 10 minutes down the road. And we also happen to have a really, really close relationships with my brothers. So my brother and sister-in-law live over on the North Shore, and they've got 2 boys as well who just seem to get along like best friends with our boys. And man, that I did not see that coming. Like, I did not have that on my family bingo card, that we would have, my brother and I, who were so different, would have boys that were about the same age who just get along really well. That's been, I can honestly say, probably the major delight of middle life for me, like middle age and of parenting, my parenting journey. And an incredible delight for me has been discovering the wider family and how that works, cousins and all.
Lovely. I had a little giggle when you're talking about your husband because I married an Australian and I do the exact same thing when I say that I feel like I have to put a disclaimer.
Yeah.
He's really lovely. It's this whole New Zealand-Australian rivalry, I think. So I had to giggle. My mum used to say to me things like, the poorest man is not the man without a cent, but the man without a dream, or that hurting people hurt, which really impacted me to strive for my goals and to have empathy for others. Did your parents have things that they repeated that stayed with you and helped shape your world like that?
Oh, wow. What a great question. Yeah, I think my family was unusual because my mum and dad are both doctors. They'd immigrated from Malaysia in the 1970s and they moved to Christchurch and had my brother, and then they moved to Wellington and had me. And, you know, it's a busy profession. They kind of done us too much harm because both my brother and I went into medicine, so it was fine. But the thing is, they were busy, and that meant that my brother and I had to be independent from quite a young age. We knew that mum and dad had moved to Aotearoa for us, and that knowledge actually, I think, is quite profoundly shaping for migrant kids. It makes you think about yourself in relationship to those who've gone before you in a really deep way. So for me, that looked like being responsible to kind of do what I could for this country that my parents had chosen, that they'd moved to. I wanted to make sure that I was, you know, just working hard and trying to be a good version of myself, trying to make a good contribution, because I felt like if I didn't, that might invalidate the choice that they'd made. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What did you and Matheson take from the way you were parented and weave it into your own parenting?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, Matheson has two lovely parents, Kay and John, who live in Sydney, and they have a really strong ethic of service in their family, just taking care of other people. Their love language would be acts of off the charts acts of service. Like when my mother-in-law comes to visit, she often does my ironing. And then at the end of finishing all my ironing, she'll apologise that there wasn't more that she could do for me, you know, that kind of thing.
I just have to say your bingo card is really full here. It's like another one.
That's right. I'd have a mother-in-law who wanted to help with ironing. Yeah, see, they're service-oriented family. My family also, like the stories of my mum and dad's families actually centre around the family helping each other. Can I give you one example? So my dad was the youngest of 8 children, and his mum was widowed when he was 11 months old. She had to raise her 8 kids who were aged, I think, 14 through to him as the youngest, in a small tin mining town in Malaysia called Ipoh in the 1940s. So you can just imagine what a Chinese woman at that time, as a solo parent, the challenges that she faced. And one of the incredible things about his family is that from the eldest through to him, the youngest, the brothers and sisters helped each other to get an education and then to work. And I think that brought them closer as a result. So they actively helped each other. They financially supported each other. My dad was supported through university by his brothers and sisters, and they all went on to do pretty well in life and happy. Very close-knit family. Now, the reason why I tell that story is because when you grow up, when I was growing up, my brother and I, hearing stories like this at the dinner table, it just had a really profound effect on how we saw ourselves in relationship to other people. You know, service-oriented family, wanting to be people who could be kind and helpful towards other people, and maybe even to be strong or to help provide or to provide shelter for others in our family. So that has had a huge impact on me. And I think I would hope that the way that we're raising Chester and Toby would also instill in them that kind of ethic.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Can I say, though, the interesting thing about that is it's not something that you can strictly tell children. It's sort of lived and breathed, and it's in stories. It's in the family stories, and it's in what we do as a family as well.
Yeah.
It's not an intellectual thing.
What are some of the ways your career has influenced your parenting and your parenting influenced your career?
It's a great question to ask a developmental paediatrician. Nothing prepared me for becoming a mum, and having one child didn't prepare me for being a mum of two. So I had some knowledge going into parenting when I had Chester. Like I think I had a pretty good kind of mum gauge for whether he was sick or not. But beyond that, I did not know what to expect. And I would say being a parent made me a much better paediatrician. I was able to understand caregivers and parents in a way that was just not open to me before I had children. So much more empathy for people who come in and they can't tell you what's going on because it's all going wrong, or, or we don't know why he's not sleeping. And that was a really good thing for me.
Empathy. I'm thinking like, where am I? What day is it? Yeah. I'm sure you see it all.
Those early days when if you have a shower, that's a real win, in your day when you've got a newborn.
We can all relate to those days. As an adult, you started swimming lessons. And I think there's so many parents out there that probably aren't that confident in the water, but they're almost too embarrassed to start now. What made you start doing lessons at this stage of life?
Great question. You must have done some reading, Dana, to find that nugget.
You.
Yeah. So I was spending time with friends after Chester was born, and I felt really inactive and unfit. And I'd not been able to learn how to swim when I was a kid properly because I had really bad eczema. And I actually became allergic to chlorine. And so I just literally could not learn how to swim. And also in Wellington, you can't really swim in the sea very easily. So my friends had said to me, you should think about swimming lessons as a form of exercise. Why don't you just combine the two? Then you can kill two birds with one stone. And then one of my friends, Rachel, said to me, I would honestly say, Jin, that my happiest memories in life are from times when I was in the water. And that just got me. So I signed up for adult swimming lessons at the local swimming pool. Yeah, it took me about 6 months to learn how to swim one length of the pool. Yeah. It was so rewarding, though.
Yeah. I'm inspired because I don't know how to dive. And I just the thought of lining up with everyone at the pool to learn how to dive. And my husband represented Queensland. So that's the difference between the two of us. So if anyone could teach me, he could. But I just need to push through my embarrassment of a few belly flops in the mix before I get it right. Yeah. Now, you learnt instruments growing up and now your boys are. And I'm really curious to hear, how have you helped them lean into not giving up and sticking with it? Because this is something that we struggle in our home.
And interestingly, people ask me this a lot because I think we have had maybe a shift over my generation, over the last generation, shifting towards these really nurturing, attentive and responsive, emotionally attuned ways of parenting, which is, I think, fantastic. But the other side of that is that just saying, go to your room and practice your instrument doesn't work anymore but that's not attending to my feelings, mummy. So, how does this actually work? Well, with Chester, we could see that he was really interested in music. There was a cello party that one of his friends threw. He was 4 years old. And after Sam had put down his cello and had stopped performing for everybody and everybody was eating cake, Chester moved away from the cake and he went and sat next to the cello. And he just sat there looking at it. And the cello teacher, Margaret, noticed that Chester was sitting next to the cello. And she came and sat next to him and said, you can touch it if you like. You can brush that string, see what sound it makes. And so I knew then that I'd found the instrument and I'd found the teacher. And Chester went on after 6 months of trying to play cello. Now, bear in mind, he was only 5 when I had this chat with him. He said he didn't want to keep going. Like, I want to give up, Mama. It's too hard. And I had what I call the chat with Chester. I said to him, darling, there are very few things in life that Daddy and I are going to ask you to do that are truly difficult. 99.9% of people who try to play the cello or try to play any instrument find it really hard. Hardly anybody is good at it when they first start. Languages are another thing. but we wouldn't ask you to do this if we didn't think that this would be really meaningful over your life. It's just, if you just show up and you just play a tiny bit every day, it will get easier, I promise you. And we'll take videos and I'll show you how you're getting better. So Chester looked at me and he said, okay, Mama. And he went back to the cello. Okay, so then Toby came along. He was 5.5. I thought, Toby is quite quick with his fingers. I'm going to try violin for Toby. I play violin. Then we'll have a string quartet because it's a lot of readers. I think I've lost a lot of listeners at this point going, oh my gosh, this lady's off a rocker. But just hear me out. Matheson plays cello and I play violin. So if Chester plays cello and Toby plays violin, then we've got a string quartet. So I'm in my head, I'm like, okay, Toby, you're going to play violin. So I said to Toby, I've chosen violin for you. This is a really difficult instrument, but I think you can do it. And we let him play with my violin. He had a little go. A couple of months into that, he says, I'm not going to do it. I don't want to play violin. So I think, okay, I'm going to give Toby the chat. So I have the chat with him. And you know what? It doesn't work at all. He's not having a bar of it. So
Not inspired.
he's not inspired at all. So I totally shelved that idea. And I was like, okay, what do I do now? So Toby said, I want to play bass. And I said, okay, well, if you want to play bass, then you're going to have to start at the beginning because you can't just straight away play bass. Your fingers are too chubby and small, darling. Like, it's not going to work until you're a bit older. So we went with ukulele. So he's playing ukulele and he loves it. So, there you go, 2 completely different kids. But I hope both of them like music going forwards.
Yeah.
Just different personalities. The same strategy obviously doesn't work for each child. And it's just sort of finding what is that strategy and,
Yeah. I was talking before with Jenny that I had football with my daughter last night. She's almost 5. And I went through all the nurturing, caring, talking, let's sideline, and I actually had to be firm of there's 4 pictures, you can decide which one. We're going to do this. You're going to have to step into being brave. Might be a bit hard, but you're going to be really proud of yourself. And she's crying, and my sister's with me watching, going, oh my goodness, let's just go home and have Milos. But she chose one, and then she was out there having the best time. And Jenny, you must hear this all the time in coaching, that thing of you don't want to make your child miserable, but you also know that there is a lesson in pushing through and sticking to something.
There's such a tension there, and I love how Jin put the nurturings there, where we're much more open to listening to children's feelings and validating that feeling makes sense, and holding the tension of knowing that in so many ways what they're going to step into will be so good for them. So holding a little bit of firmness there, and even watching for a while. Children are different, and some kids you just take along to the football field and you might, attend a few times before they actually step in, but they will feel something resolute sort of in you. And then if you've really got the wrong sport or it really isn't them, I love how we can sort of change a little bit. We can alter it. We don't have to stick to it. And then just hearing, Jim with the boys, they didn't respond in the same way to the inspiring little chat.
the pep talk.
Yeah. But I love the pep talk as well. So I think we hold a little bit of nudging there. I don't like the word pushing, but I'd say nudging is quite good, and being kind of persistent and exposing them to, a number of awesome things. This might lead on to sleep deprivation. I don't know if you lost any sleep over it, but I think all parents to some degree are part of this group or have been. It might be a distant memory. It might not. How did you handle the lack of sleep with all that you were carrying? And whether it's still an ongoing thing for some families? Goes on and on.
She's looking at me. I know. Got a 7-year-old that's like a little ninja that wakes up next to me in bed every morning.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Yeah, imperfectly. How did I handle it imperfectly? So I was planning to go back to work after having had Toby. I thought, I'll go back to work after, I don't know, maybe 7-8 months, something like that. Because, with Chester, it sounds strange, but he was such an easygoing baby, so, easy to put to sleep, slept through the night really early on. I was actually ready to engage my brain at about 6 months, which is really lucky, I know, but that's how he was. So I kind of had similar expectations for Toby. But we got to 12 months with Toby and I was absolutely shattered and I pushed it back. So I just said, okay, we're going to have to do more. I'm going to have to spend more time on maternity leave because he's not ready. And then when I went back, I had to kind of ease into it, and I developed all kinds of strategies to deal with the sleep deprivation, like making lists and, using my iCal on my phone just to get around that. But I suppose I had some practice because, I'd done night shifts, a lot of night shifts, so you kind of get used to being a bit sleep deprived.
Maybe I need to work at night. Maybe
that's not the answer. No, that's not the answer.
We're doing the podcast at 11 p.m, everyone. We're going to change it up. Hey, Matheson, a philosopher. And all you do, I would imagine that you both spend a little bit of time in your heads. Yeah. So when you're trying to connect and unwind, what does that look like? Are you guys board games, puzzles, Netflix, walks along the beach? How do you guys do that?
Oh, as a family.
But maybe for you too as well.
For us too? It's interesting. People think that because of our jobs and the people that we are, that we must have really kind of intellectual, in-depth conversations about
I would
big
think
things.
that you're watching Love is Blind at night or something. That's what I'm thinking. You're watching
a lot of Do you know what? We're actually watching a lot of sports docos on Netflix. Like that's how we unwind, is watching Formula One, Drive to Survive, or
that
whatever
was
it
good,
is.
though.
It's very good.
Yeah.
Maybe it's watching people who are more stressed out than we are at work. Like that's kind of encouraging. What I've found with the boys is working in high-octane jobs. To connect with them requires that I consciously choose to turn to them. One day I was really busy. This was earlier this year. And I noticed, I was busy, I was distracted, I was doing emails at the same time as dinner was going, at the same time as I was minding the boys. So I was doing 3 things at once. And over the course of an hour, I think Toby made maybe 7 or 8, maybe more bids for my attention. We got to about the 12th bid and he still wasn't frustrated. Like he knew, and I'd been kind of fobbing him off gently. But we got to about the 12th bid and I just kind of looked up from my laptop and I noticed him. And I thought, I wonder how many bids he's made. Maybe 10 by now. And so then I thought, I have to shut my laptop. I have to shut that working part of my brain and I need to tune into him. So I did that. And I think that's the kind of conscious decision that I have to make a lot, often.
Mm-hmm. And it's quite hard to do a U-turn because you've got to almost consciously, like you just said, make that decision. I'm going to delay something, which has often got a sense of urgency, or I could just finish this and it would be done. So I think parenting's quite a lot of accepting a lot of interruptions. I remember with young kids not being able to finish a line of thought being frustrating. I just wanted to think that to its conclusion and then realised that's going to have to, I can't do that right now. You've been doing some really interesting research, Jin. Can you tell us a little bit about the research around impact of poverty on children?
Sure. So, amazingly, I just passed my PhD exam. So
it was 10 years, wasn't it?
It was.
I saw that and I looked, I think, is it normally take like 4 to 7 years or 4 to 6? And I was so in awe. I'm like, 10 years shows that you've done it at the pace that you've needed to do it for your family, for yourself. And I just thought that was amazing.
Totally.
Yeah. So congratulations.
Thank you. Just another lesson in its life lesson in itself that, you sign up to a PhD program, you think it's going to be 3 to 4 years because 4 years is the maximum. But then you find that you have to work part-time because you have kids, and then you take time off to have kids and take time off to have a pandemic. And before you know it, it's sort of part-time. 4 years is actually 8 years. And add on all the other bits, you get 10 years. But no, I was really proud of myself and the boys were super proud. Yeah, so now I can actually speak to that as a finished piece of work. Well, I used the Growing Up in New Zealand study. This is 6,500 children and their families in New Zealand. It's New Zealand's largest and most contemporary, most diverse, ethnically, socioeconomically diverse cohort of children. And I looked at children's data in the first 5 years of life before school and constructed kind of trajectories for those children, their developmental health trajectories. And I studied what are the factors that influence children's development and health. What are those big general factors? And yeah, poverty came up again and again. It was a real theme of my thesis. What I found with poverty was that it's not the case that if you fall below a certain income level, that you fall into poverty, that you see then that there's an effect on children, on their development and health. That's only part of the story. What I found in my research was that at every level of income that's below ideal, below the top level of income, that you could see the impacts, a gradient on children's developmental health. Which is just to say that even while we acknowledge that there's always going to be some form of inequality in a free society, we really need to, in health education and social services, push the whole curve for children's outcomes up higher so that children at any level of household income are able to reach their developmental potential. That would be my dream coming out of the thesis. So I did a lot of thinking about that. And really interesting findings there.
We know that children living in poverty tend to be more at risk of being admitted into hospital with all sorts of things, skin infections, asthma, but also their social development, their language and emotional development, that's affected by poverty. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many components to not having enough income and not having enough to go around. You know, there are different ways in which poverty impacts on a child's experience. One is we all think immediately of the material deprivation. So if you don't have shoes or warm clothes, or your house is damp and mouldy, that you might get sick a lot. That's going to influence your physical health. You might have more asthma, more strep throat, more skin infections. I think a lot of people understand that. But the other thing is, if you're a family that's in financial stress and strain, and maybe you've got a parent working shifts or 2 jobs to make ends meet, and maybe your family, your mum or primary caregiver is busy looking after other family members who are also struggling, well, then you've got a caregiver parent who might be really divided in their attention, and there might be a lot going on. The stress itself of being poor can undermine a really good parent's capacity to be present to their children and to do the kind of serve and return parenting, you know, where you speak with the child and the child wait for the child to speak to you and you respond, and it's this sort of to and fro communication. You might be too under pressure to actually be able to do that sort of parenting. And children who are growing up poor miss out in that way too. So we see that in terms of their language development, which can lag behind, and in their social-emotional development. They learn other ways to communicate if they're not being listened to. For instance, they might act how they feel rather than saying how they feel. And then that has flow-on impacts into the classroom when they start school.
So you're seeing all these different points of how poverty is affected in so many different ways with your research. Do you start to see how that could change? I mean, other than let's all be given a bit more money and be in a better place.
Yeah.
What did you see on the side that could kind of be helping in those areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think we like to think that there's easy solutions here.
Wouldn't that be lovely?
It'd be great, wouldn't it? And like I said, we still want to live in a society where everybody has has enough to make ends meet. Like that would be great. But beyond that, one of the factors that came out really strongly in my research that was very, not just protective for children's development and health, but actually move them forwards towards flourishing, the flourishing end of the spectrum, was reading to children before they could speak, so in infancy. So I found in one of the studies that I did that if the more frequently a parent read to their child in infancy, like several times a day, the more frequently a child was read to, the higher their language skills, cognitive development, social emotional and behavioral development. And if I step back and look at that result, I think that's not just the act of reading to a child. That factor there, reading to a child, is probably just a proxy or a stand-in for a whole set of behaviours that's happening in that home between the parent and the child. That it indicates that the parent has time that they can read, that maybe they can get to a library, they might have some access to books, but also that they recognise that even a child who can't speak is learning, and that it's valuable to put time and effort into talking, singing, spending time with children. That's what I think is going on there. The interesting thing is that reading, that behaviour of reading to your child or spending time with your child, that factor was just, in terms of the size of its impact, was as impactful in magnitude as poverty. And it was in spite of the level of deprivation of the family. You could adjust for, in my statistical models, I could adjust for poverty and still find that reading to your child was having this tremendous positive effect. So yeah, the lesson there is, it's not just about reading to your child, it's about singing to your child, speaking to your child, spending time with them, waiting for them to communicate with you. Comes out such a powerful thing that we can do.
And it's also that beautiful warmth of the embrace, because when you're reading, you are physically attached. You're closer. They've got your heartbeat and they've got your tone of voice, and that's exciting.
I can't wait to read tonight now. We're calling this short. You said in an interview it's become especially important for you over your career as a paediatrician to learn how to be a good treaty partner. Can you tell us a bit about what that means?
I'm sure that a lot of people listening to this podcast will be aware that because of poverty and the long arm of colonisation, certain groups in our society, particularly tangata whenua, Māori, are not doing as well as they really ought to across a range of outcomes. And also that our health and education systems don't do enough to reach these families. We used to say hard to reach families. We now say hardly reached, which is because the responsibility is on us as a system to reach families. Being a good treaty partner for me, as someone who's tō iwi Chinese, means always carrying with me at the forefront of my mind the well-being of our Māori Indigenous population, and making sure that when we are thinking of interventions, that we have to come up with solutions and initiatives that are going to work for Māori families. Because if we can get it right for Māori families, chances are we can get it right for pretty much everybody. And I say that as someone who's Chinese as well. I'll give you an example. If we can provide health information that is easier to digest, a service that is more nurturing and feels more like a whānau than, coming in and someone being kind of cold and clinical, chances are a Chinese migrant family, like the one I'm from, will respond to that well as well. So will maybe a Pacific family, or a family that's under a lot of stress and is, in poverty. Chances are those things that work are in some ways universal as well. So for me, I try and always hold that in my mind and work together with Māori colleagues as a treaty partner.
I think as a parent, we can worry about our kids' health a lot. Like, is that just a sore throat, or is that the start of strep? As a doctor with so much knowledge, does that knowledge put you at ease more or create more stress?
I don't stress about their physical health because, I have a really lovely GP, and I'm actually at a clinic where you can still book in and see the GP. So that's a good thing. And I also think that I've seen so many kids who are very, very unwell that it takes a lot for me to get stressed. And I know that's not everyone's experience, but that's how it is for me. But the thing that I struggle with is trying to figure out my children's behaviour, their development. is what I'm seeing, is this typical? Is this normal? Or is this actually, is this beyond what's normal? He's high energy. Is that ADHD? Is that normal? How am I going to judge that? Those are the things that I wrestle with. And I'm sure a lot of parents are the same. Those questions don't go away just because I'm a paediatrician.
I feel like those conversations me and my husband have had. It's 8 o'clock and he still looks like he needs to go for a run around the block. Is this normal?
This is normal.
We don't always talk about what we are grateful for when it comes to our medical system. But I'm grateful for Healthline. They have been such a reassurance, and I've called them all hours of the day. So incredibly grateful for that service. And that kids' doctor visits are free. That's just, I think, really amazing. What are the areas you see the medical system championing around families right now?
Yeah, great question. I mean, every time I go overseas, I actually come away feeling pretty grateful to be raising a family here in Aotearoa. Just over the July school holidays, for the very first time, I took my boys to Singapore and Malaysia to meet their extended family. Okay, now Singapore, small 5 million people on a very small island at the bottom of Malaysia, and Singapore has some of the best health statistics in the world. But when I was there, I was talking to my cousin, who's a school teacher, and she explained that in that system, what she was seeing as a primary school teacher were a lot of children who were dysregulated and having issues with their behaviour coming out of the pandemic. And we are seeing that in New Zealand too, right? But I said to her, in New Zealand, we have developmental paediatricians like myself. We have other paediatricians who can see them. We've got a well child service, network. We've got GPs. A lot of them do extra training in paediatrics. We've got a Ministry of Education learning support team who wrap around to give extra support to children who've got behavioural issues. And I think in Aotearoa, we like to whinge about things like that it's not enough, we don't have enough. But actually, if you look at what we do have and how we collaborate across our systems, we're doing well in terms of the pathways and the processes that we have and the way that our services pull together.
If you could make one change tomorrow, though, is there anything in particular that you'd seen that you're like, I wish we could do this as well? Or with all your research and...
You know how we have a culture where it's normal to go to an antenatal program in pregnancy? I wish that we had a culture that had normalised parenting and family support services in the first year of life, where that was just the norm. You do an antenatal course and then you do a community course. I don't know if we'd call it parenting because some parents might not want that, but some kind of community where you're just connected to your community. But we have these things, and Parenting Place knows we have these things. But what I'd love is if that was just the norm.
I feel like there must be high numbers of burnout for doctors, especially ones who have families, and there's so much to juggle and crazy hours. How can we better support doctors here in New Zealand?
Yeah, great question. I think doctors burn out because we're givers and we're just constantly looking for things to do to help others and putting others first and trying to improve the system. And that's just a recipe for burnout when you combine that with long hours. How can we support doctors? I think what actually would help is better integration of health, education and social services, that we work together, because some of the cases that keep me awake at night are the ones where there is just such a high level of complexity that there's no one thing to do next, and you have to kind of, as a team of people, figure it out. And so if we can learn to work together and support each other across the various agencies, then that would reduce stress. There are other areas of the health system which are not, outside of developmental paediatrics, where maybe we just need to retain more of the doctors that we train, who are generally pretty amazing. The doctors that I work with who are at the end of their training program are so committed and so knowledgeable, and I just want to keep them here so that they can serve Aotearoa.
My husband saw that question as he was coming past my computer, and he said, need to be eating well and exercising. I'm sure the doctors do if they've got time. He goes, no, we need to. That's how we can support doctors. We need to look after ourselves better. And I thought, well, actually,
it's a really selfless thing to do to help the health system.
Yeah.
Said I'm going to eat better tonight just to try and take a little bit of that pressure off.
Jin, parenting's got a combination of wonderful things and challenging things. We call it the mess and the magic. Where would you be finding the mess and the magic right now in your parenting?
I think for us, messiness is about dealing with two boys who are clever in their own ways, who feel anxiety from time to time. And anxiety, just like anger, is an emotion that masquerades as something else. It comes out as behavior, comes out as dysregulation, comes out as irritability. And actually what it is I'm worried, you know, my child is worried. That creates a lot of messiness. And, you know, we'd need a whole nother hour to talk about how do you address that. But I hear that there's a course on anxiety that parents can take.
Yeah, Untangling Anxiety is our new online course. So, yeah, that speaks exactly to what you're sharing, Jin, is that many families are feeling the, it might look like anger, but it sits there as anxiety, and it might be small things that we think are easily brushed off, but it really is something that families are struggling with right now.
Yep. I think one of the things that's hard about anxiety is that children don't often come to you and say, I'm feeling anxious. They will just express it, and you have to kind of read that situation. You know, all behaviour is communication. The magic, well, I am absolutely loving being a mum to two primary school aged boys. I think for us, magic comes from spending time together as a family when we're sort of in that playful space and we're kind of ribbing each other. That's happening more and more, actually, as the boys are getting more slick at beating us at board games and so on. We do this thing which we developed in the, you know, as a family ritual during the pandemic called the family game. We try to do it most nights. We don't often, maybe 3 times a week we'd get to do the family game. And we take turns as a family choosing what the game will be that night. That's our kind of dedicated time. If it's Toby choosing, we're going to have to dress up. We're going to have to do something wild. He's going to direct us. He's going to teach us how to be ninjas, or he's going to run a dojo, or we're going to be in the military, or sometimes we have to be a band. That's Toby. Wow. If it's Chester, it'll be he will have made a board game for us, and we're going to try playing his board game. I absolutely love that time.
Very special.
That is delightful. I love it, and I love that you've dedicated some weeks of the night where it's going to happen. One day, Chester and Toby, your beautiful boys, will leave home, and they'll take with them the values and the lessons and the love and the support that you've given them. What would you hope to see when they were about to leave out the door? What would they have in their backpack as they venture out on their own?
So good. Well, one is I want them to know that they can reach out to Daddy and me anytime, that we're there for them and we got their back. And this is something I said to Toby a couple of months ago when he was going through some really stressful time at school with his learning. And I said, you know something, Toby, like Daddy and I, we're on your team. We're really committed to you. We're really committed to helping you. And we're not going to stop, you know, helping you. And I just want the boys to know that. And I also want them to feel that for each other. When they have a spat, I'll often pull them apart and say, boys, we don't just want to be the kind of family where we're not fighting. We want to be the kind of family where we're championing each other. I expect both of you to champion each other. So how can we do that? That's what I want for them to have when they grow up, like each other and their cousins.
Paying for each other's school fees.
Yeah, I love that, Jin, that whole championing each other, not just expecting a tolerance, but a real honouring each other and calling out the gold in each other as well. So it's nice. A beautiful way to finish.
Jenny, I always love that last question about the big family dream because I feel like I keep just filling up my bag with ideas from my own family. And I loved that idea of them knowing that as parents, we're always there, that we're on the same team. I thought that was really beautiful.
It is such a profound thing for your kids to know that you are on their team, their side, you have their best interests at heart, and that you will always be available for them, just so that they sense that when they go off, when they do something wrong, when they are in trouble, when they're anxious, they just know I've got a team that will be there for me. And when parents express that, when we are coaching them and they say that right up front, this is what we want to know, that our kids, even when they leave home, will know that we are their support and we'll still be around for them and we'll help them when and where we can. It's a very safe net for kids and young adults to have.
I saw that you got really excited when Jin mentioned reading and that being such a solid thread and the research of the impact that can have reading with your child in a family.
It is such a amazing thing that we can do with our kids. Reading to them can be a daily activity. Sometimes it's 5 minutes, sometimes it's 20. But there are so many things going on when we read to our kids. It's like we've pursued them. We get the book out. We say, I want to read to you. We're close. We're warm, affectionate. They're near us. They hear our tone of voice. We slow down because the pace is slower. We're choosing some one-on-one time with them. I mean, there's so much happening in the reading that if you were stuck on an island with your child and you could choose one thing to take with you, well, a few, take a pile of books or make up stories for your kids, because I think it will reach them in all the places kids need to be reached.
Yeah, it ticks so many boxes. And I think too, quite often parents are trying to connect more with their child. And what a beautiful place to start with reading.
Yep. I don't think there really isn't anything better than reading.
If you want to find out more about Parenting Place, about coaching, sitting here with Jenny, or one of our other wonderful coaches, get in touch. parentingplace.nz is the place to go.
Rover. Music, radio, podcasts.